In a courtroom boiling with tension, a young black boy stood in handcuffs, surrounded by towering officers and accusations he didn't understand. Just when it seemed judgment had already been decided without evidence, the doors swung open, and an FBI agent entered, file in hand. One sentence changed everything. Release him now. This is the story of false judgment, hidden truths, and the thunderous power of justice spoken at just the right moment. Location: City Courthouse, Chicago. Time: 2:47 p.m., Tuesday. The courtroom was a sterile, intimidating environment. Fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows, wooden panels gleaming under the unkind brightness. The smell of polished wood and recycled air filled the space, a cold reminder of authority and rigid order. In the center stood Elijah Ford, a boy barely 15, his colorful but faded clothes clashing painfully against the dark suits and somber dresses surrounding him. His hands, shackled in heavy cuffs, trembled slightly at his sides. Every movement seemed magnified, every breath a silent battle against the crushing weight of judgment. His eyes darted nervously around the room, to the judge's impassive face, to the prosecutor's sneer, to the few empty seats meant for supporters that remained heartbreakingly vacant. It seemed everyone in the room had already made up their minds before the proceedings even began. A police officer, large and red-faced, barked accusations with venom. His words ricocheted off the courtroom walls, each syllable a blow Elijah could not deflect. Thief, liar, dangerous. Each label found its mark, not because they were true, but because they were convenient. Easier to fit him into a narrative than to ask inconvenient questions. Around him, silent glances passed like electric currents. Officials, jurors, spectators, all exchanging looks heavy with presumption. Elijah was not just on trial for what he had or had not done. He was on trial for daring to exist in a space where society had already decided he did not belong. The judge shuffled papers with mechanical detachment. The defense attorney, a frazzled public defender juggling too many cases, offered little more than a whisper of resistance. It seemed inevitable, a script already written, a verdict ready to be rubber-stamped. But then, a sound, a ripple. The heavy courtroom doors creaked open, heads turned, whispers skittered through the room like startled birds. Their message was clear without a word spoken. Elijah was not a statistic. He was not a villain. He was theirs, their student, their neighbor, their son. The officials shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor's face tightened. Even the judge leaned back slightly, unsettled, because now the narrative was no longer so clean. Have you ever seen injustice start to crumble before it could cement? Elijah Ford had never been a troublemaker. Born into a fractured system, he spent more time navigating instability than enjoying any kind of childhood. His earliest memories were of shelters and cold cereal breakfasts, of waiting in long lines for donated coats in the winter. Raised by his grandmother, a soft-spoken woman who worked double shifts as a hospital janitor, Elijah learned early to keep his head down and his heart guarded. They lived in a cramped two-room apartment where the pipes rattled and the ceiling flaked paint like snow. It wasn't much, but it was home. School was both a refuge and a battleground. Elijah loved reading, especially stories about explorers and scientists, but teachers often overlooked him, assuming laziness where there was simply exhaustion. He carried heavy worries most kids never knew, worries about rent, about whether Nana's knees could hold out one more month, about whether his clothes would hold together till the end of the school year. Despite it all, Elijah excelled quietly. He volunteered at the local community center, tutoring younger kids in math and helping organize food drives. He dreamed not of escaping his neighborhood, but of lifting it up with him. But poverty paints a target. It draped over Elijah like an unavoidable jacket. One day, after school, Elijah found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. A nearby convenience store had been robbed by two older boys he barely knew. They ran past him, laughing, and a block later, police sirens wailed. Officers flooded the scene, looking for suspects, and Elijah, young, black alone, fit their narrative too easily. He tried to explain, but explanations didn't carry the same weight as skin color in a hurried search for someone to blame. Handcuffed without evidence, shoved into a cruiser without a second look, Elijah was booked for a crime he hadn't committed. His protests were ignored, lost in the paperwork already drafted in ink. By the time his grandmother scraped together enough to find him a public defender, the case file was thick with assumptions and thin on facts. The first few court dates blurred together. Elijah sat silently as prosecutors painted him as a known associate of troublemakers, twisting neighborly hellos into conspiratorial winks. His heart pounded against the heavy silence of injustice. All the while, Nana sat behind him in the gallery, a crumpled tissue in one hand, a prayer clutched in the other. Elijah began to lose hope. Each hearing felt like another stone stacked onto his back. The system wasn't built to believe kids like him. It was built to process them, to move them from classrooms to courtrooms with assembly line efficiency. But beneath his trembling hands, beneath the battered second-hand shoes and the hand-me-down hoodie, Elijah held something the court hadn't counted on: resilience born of survival. He remembered every book he had read, every figure who faced injustice and still stood up. Frederick Douglass, Rosa Parks, Cesar Chavez. They weren't superheroes. They were people like him, people who understood that being written off didn't mean being erased. As his final hearing approached, Elijah steeled himself. He wasn't sure if the truth would save him, but he was sure he wouldn't let fear silence him. And somewhere, deep inside that cold, fluorescent-lit courthouse, the tide of fate began to shift. Not because the system was fair, but because sometimes, even in broken places, truth still finds a crack to bloom through. Have you ever seen a young life fight to be seen not as a statistic, but as a soul? Trouble began when a series of burglaries rattled downtown businesses. Glass was shattered, cash registers emptied, and the community buzzed with fear. The local authorities, under pressure to deliver swift results, started hunting for suspects based more on appearances than evidence. Elijah Ford, carrying parts for a drone project, happened to be in the vicinity, carefully balancing his precious cargo wrapped in worn cloth. The spare wires, broken controllers, and old motherboard he had painstakingly salvaged from donations were all tucked neatly into his backpack. He wasn't loitering or hiding. He wasn't running. He was walking home the way he always did, dreaming about how he would piece together his homemade drone to finally enter the upcoming science fair. But fear works faster than facts. A nervous shopkeeper, spooked by news reports and societal bias, noticed Elijah passing by. She peered through the window, heart pounding, and saw a black boy acting suspiciously with gadgets. It was enough. Without verifying what she saw, she picked up the phone and called the police. Within minutes, sirens howled through the humid evening air. Squad cars screeched around the block. Officers poured out, guns drawn, voices raised. Hands up! Backpack on the ground. Elijah froze, stunned. A broken controller slipped from his trembling hands and clattered onto the sidewalk. I'm just on the ground. He obeyed immediately, confusion and fear knotting his stomach. His heart pounded louder than the sirens now blaring behind him. No one asked him why he was there. No one looked in the backpack before cuffing him roughly and hauling him into the back of the cruiser. In the patrol car, Elijah tried to explain. His voice was small, nearly drowned out by the officer's harsh commands. "I'm building something. I'm not stealing. I'm building." But they weren't listening. Fear had already done its damage. They needed an arrest. They needed a face to match the fear in the headlines. At the station, they emptied his backpack on the table. Out spilled wires, instruction manuals, a cracked phone, and scraps of soldering metal. No money, no jewelry, no electronics matching any stolen items. Still, the booking papers were filled out. Attempted burglary. Suspicious behavior near crime scene. Charges filed. Fingerprints taken. Mugshot snapped. Story written. His public defender met him 15 minutes before the hearing. She glanced at the police report, sighed, and said, "I'll see what kind of deal they'll offer." Elijah didn't understand. Deal for what? He hadn't stolen anything. He hadn't hurt anyone. All he wanted was to build a drone. Word spread in the local news, not about a boy and his dreams, but about another delinquent suspect. His face, solemn and confused, flashed across the screen without context. His name circulated in whispers like smoke. When the day of the hearing came, Elijah's grandmother couldn't be there. She worked 2 shifts and had no transportation. His science teacher, Mrs. Laney, heard too late and scrambled to get there, arriving breathless just as the hearing started. Inside the courtroom, the prosecutor painted a picture of prowling, preparing to burglarize, suspicious behavior consistent with previous incidents. Elijah sat hunched at the defense table, his spirit already frayed. The words chipped away at him. Prowling, suspicious, dangerous. He wasn't on trial for any crime committed. He was on trial for existing where fear said he shouldn't. The judge tapped his pen impatiently. The public defender mumbled through objections. The courtroom buzzed with a narrative already too loud to hear Elijah's small, shaking voice. The evidence? A backpack of dreams mistaken for a toolkit of crime. As the police officer testified, describing the threatening posture of a boy carrying broken gadgets, the cracks in the story were obvious, but ignored. It didn't matter that Elijah had never had a disciplinary issue in school. It didn't matter that he volunteered at the community center teaching younger kids how to code. It didn't matter that he dreamed not of crime, but of inventions. Fear had made up its mind. Within hours, Elijah stood facing the possibility of detention, or worse, a record that would shadow him forever. Because once a system demands a scapegoat, it rarely lets truth get in the way. Have you ever seen someone punished simply because the system demanded a scapegoat? Inside the courtroom, the spectacle began. The prosecution wasted no time painting Elijah as a potential mastermind, weaving a narrative built more on fear than facts. They spoke of tech-savvy criminal rings, pointing to Elijah's bag of drone parts as if it were a vault of sinister secrets rather than the modest beginnings of a hobbyist's project. A uniformed officer, his voice tight with emotion, gestured wildly from the stand. "Kids like him," he thundered, "are why our streets aren't safe anymore." He punctuated every word with a pointed glare at Elijah, who sat frozen in his chair. The audience, packed with parents of burglary victims and curious onlookers, leaned in. Some nodded grimly with each accusation. Others whispered angry comments under their breath. In their eyes, Elijah was already guilty, an emblem of every fear they had been taught to harbor. Elijah opened his mouth to speak, but the cold stare of the prosecutor pinned him back into silence. His defense attorney, overworked and overwhelmed, shifted uncomfortably, offering no lifeline. The judge barely glanced up. his pen scratching mechanically against his notes. His face remained unreadable, detached, as if the life of a child was just another item on a crowded docket. The evidence presented was flimsy at best, an assortment of circumstantial claims, assumptions, and conjectures. Yet the atmosphere in the room gave it the gravity of absolute truth. No one questioned why Elijah's fingerprints weren't on any stolen property. No one mentioned that no break-in had been recorded at the alleged times. No one cared that the gadgets were broken drone parts, not burglary tools. Verdicts were forming in minds like storm clouds gathering, heavy, inevitable, and ready to rain down punishment. The courtroom became a theater, a place not of justice, but of performance. And Elijah, trembling, was cast as the villain before he ever had a chance to defend himself. Have you ever seen justice being traded for convenience? Just as sentencing seemed inevitable, the back doors of the courtroom burst open with a suddenness that startled everyone present. Special Agent Olivia Reyes entered with a presence so commanding that the thick tension hanging over the room seemed to part before her. In her mid-30s, wearing a sharply tailored suit and polished black boots, she moved with the kind of purpose that could not be faked. The courtroom, filled with murmurs and restless bodies, fell into an uneasy silence. Clutched under her arm was a thick dossier, stamped with official insignias and urgent red markings. Each step she took was deliberate, each movement radiating the quiet power of someone who carried not just authority, but the weight of truth itself. Crossing the floor with long strides, Olivia approached the judge's bench. Without a word, she placed the heavy file onto the polished wood. The sound echoed in the stunned silence, loud as a gavel. The judge looked up sharply, confused, flipping open the folder. His eyes scanned quickly, then widened slightly in shock. Olivia turned then, facing the officers clustered near Elijah. Her voice was calm but slicing through the heavy air like a blade. "Release him. Now." The order dropped like a bomb. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Some jurors leaned forward. Parents of victims stiffened, frowning. The prosecutor looked as if he might choke on his objections. The officers, who had up to that moment treated Elijah like a dangerous animal, froze. They glanced at each other, their hands hesitating at his cuffs. "Agent Reyes, this is highly irregular," the judge began, but she interrupted, her tone cutting but respectful. "Irregular, Your Honor, is detaining a minor without probable cause. Irregular is forging an arrest record based on unverified reports. Irregular is fabricating evidence because you needed a scapegoat to close your case before elections." Her words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Slowly, with hands that shook more from fear than from duty, the officers removed Elijah's cuffs. The clinking sound as they fell away seemed to crack the concrete assumptions that had boxed him in. Elijah stared, wide-eyed, as his wrists were freed. A red mark from the metal bracelets circled his skin like a fading accusation. Olivia knelt so that she was eye-level with him. "You're going home, Elijah," she said gently. "You should have never been here." Tears, suppressed until now, welled in his eyes. From the gallery, murmurs erupted, not of outrage this time, but of shame. Because in that moment, truth had not arrived politely. It had marched in, kicked open the doors, and demanded a reckoning. Have you ever seen prejudice recoil at the sound of truth? Inside the dossier lay the truth. Time-stamped surveillance videos showed Elijah attending a robotics competition during each of the alleged burglaries. Footage captured him hunched over tables with wires, controllers, and gears, his face focused in deep concentration. In every frame, he was right where he said he was, miles away from the scenes of the crimes. Alongside the videos were signed affidavits. Mentors, teachers, and event organizers had penned statements, some hastily written, but all unwavering in their certainty. Elijah Ford was not a criminal. He was a brilliant, curious boy whose passion for engineering had kept him glued to the competition venue for the entire day. GPS data further bolstered his innocence, mapping his phone's location consistently within the bounds of the event site. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and immediate. Then came the most damning revelation. Real suspects had already been apprehended hours before Elijah's arrest, a fact buried deep in departmental alerts that had gone ignored by the officers, too eager for a convenient target. As Special Agent Reyes presented each piece of evidence, the courtroom shifted palpably. The heavy atmosphere cracked and thinned. Murmurs of disbelief began to ripple through the gallery. Spectators shifted uncomfortably. Some dropped their eyes. Some leaned forward, staring at the evidence they had been so willing to dismiss. The officers involved visibly paled, their rigid postures sagging under the weight of exposure. The prosecutor shuffled papers aimlessly, as if trying to find a place to hide. Elijah's sister, who had sat stiff and silent for so long, let out a trembling sob. She pressed her fists to her mouth, her knuckles white with years of helpless rage finally finding a crack. Elijah remained frozen for a moment, not daring to believe. His hands, still trembling from the cold metal of the cuffs, hung in midair. The judge's pen stopped moving. His glasses slid down the bridge of his nose as he peered over the documents. His expression, once detached and imperious, now twisted into something closer to regret. Or maybe recognition. What had once seemed a tidy narrative, a quick conviction, a clear culprit, lay in ruins at his feet. Elijah's voice, small but steady, finally broke the silence. "I told you," he said, his words almost a whisper but carrying across the entire room. He was right. Have you ever seen a mountain of lies collapse in the blink of an eye? The judge, now red-faced with a mix of shame and urgency, slammed his gavel once, the sound echoing through the hushed courtroom. "This court orders the immediate release of Elijah Ford," he declared, his voice cracking slightly under the weight of his admission. The public apology that followed was rare, almost historic, as the judge looked directly at Elijah, acknowledging not just a miscarriage of justice, but a betrayal of trust. The courtroom, once a furnace of assumptions and hostility, shifted palpably. Some spectators gasped, others exchanged mortified glances. A few parents who had sat rigid in judgment mere minutes ago now fidgeted in their seats, their certainty shattered by the sudden onslaught of truth. Agent Olivia Reyes, standing firm beside Elijah, stepped forward and requested an internal investigation into the arresting officers. Her voice, calm but stern, left no room for negotiation. She cited the deliberate ignoring of evidence, the racial profiling, and the gross procedural failures that had led to the wrongful accusation of an innocent boy. The prosecutor, who had only hours earlier painted Elijah as a dangerous mastermind, now trembled as he rose. With a glance at the judge and a visible lump in his throat, he announced the formal withdrawal of all charges. His carefully crafted narrative crumbled, leaving him exposed and ashamed. In the gallery, the parents who had nodded grimly during the accusations now avoided Elijah's gaze. Their silence was heavy, thick with the realization that they had been willing participants in a rush to judgment fueled by bias and fear. Elijah stood silently as the cuffs were removed. His wrists, reddened and sore, bore the physical imprint of injustice. Yet his face held no malice. He did not gloat or shout. He simply stood taller, a boy transformed into a symbol of quiet resistance and undeniable truth. The court clerk returned Elijah's belongings, his backpack containing broken drone parts and the tattered notebook filled with his dreams, dreams almost stolen by a system too eager to blame. As he walked out of the defendant's box, Agent Reyes placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and respect. The bailiffs, who had once treated him roughly, now stepped aside, their eyes cast downward. Elijah's grandmother rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. She wrapped him in a hug so fierce it seemed to anchor him against the weight of what had just occurred. Around them, the whispers continued. But now they carried a different tone, one of reckoning, of guilt, of long overdue acknowledgement. Reporters scrambled to capture the scene, their flashes capturing Elijah's resolute profile, Agent Reyes' unwavering support, and the judge's solemn expression. The story had shifted, no longer about a supposed criminal act, but about a community forced to confront its prejudices. In that single moment, Elijah's story was rewritten. No longer a cautionary tale of suspicion, he became a beacon of perseverance. His courage under pressure, his refusal to break, and his ability to stand tall in the face of overwhelming odds reframed him not as a victim, but as a victor. Outside the courtroom, as he stepped into the sunlight, Elijah paused. He closed his eyes for a brief second, feeling the warmth on his skin, a freedom too easily taken for granted, now savored deeply. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would still be whispers, still be stares. But he had tasted a new kind of power, the power of truth, of resilience, of dignity unbowed. Have you ever seen a single moment reframe a person's entire story? Within hours, Elijah's story exploded across the internet, his name etched into timelines, headlines, and conversations spanning the globe. The hashtag #ReleaseHimNow surged to the top of trending charts, gathering millions of mentions within the first 12 hours. Celebrities, activists, politicians, and ordinary citizens rallied behind him, sharing his story with hashtags demanding accountability and reform. No longer was Elijah just a boy in a courtroom. He became a symbol of all the countless unseen, unheard, and unjustly accused. Major news outlets dedicated entire segments to the injustice he endured. Clips of the courtroom scene, of Elijah trembling in handcuffs, of Special Agent Olivia Reyes storming in, of the judge's awkward apology, played on a continuous loop. Anchors spoke his name with a reverence usually reserved for war heroes or Nobel laureates. His face appeared on magazine covers, online banners, and television interviews, even though he had yet to give a single public statement. The outpouring of support was swift and overwhelming. Prestigious universities reached out, offering him full scholarships. Robotics companies sent formal internship offers, some even pledging mentorships and future employment. A renowned engineering nonprofit established the Elijah Ford STEM Scholarship, aimed at supporting marginalized youth interested in science and technology. Pope Francis himself issued a rare, poignant statement from the Vatican. True innocence does not shout. It stands firm, and we must learn to listen. The dignity of one boy reminds us of the dignity we are sworn to protect in all children. The quote was shared and reshared millions of times, translated into dozens of languages, capturing the profound impact Elijah's quiet resilience had on a watching world. City councils, from New York to Nairobi, passed new measures mandating body cameras, citizen review boards, and stricter arrest protocols for minors. Law firms offered pro bono legal services to fight wrongful convictions. Activists organized candlelight vigils and marches, carrying signs emblazoned with Elijah's name, demanding systemic change. Elijah himself remained humble through the storm. In his first interview, sitting quietly in a local community center, he said simply, "I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to be free." His voice was calm, steady, but laced with a wisdom few could ignore. Journalists and academics began publishing papers and articles citing the Elijah effect, a phenomenon where a singular moment of revealed truth forces a collective societal reckoning. College courses discussed his case under sections on bias, systemic injustice, and youth advocacy. Parents across the country, especially Black and brown parents, held their children tighter that week, telling them about a boy named Elijah who refused to break under false judgment. Teachers shared his story in classrooms. Pastors preached sermons about courage and truth, invoking his name from pulpits. Elijah became a symbol of hope and resistance, living proof that even in a broken system, even against towering odds, the battle for justice could still be won. He did not ask to be a movement. He did not seek the spotlight. But his refusal to surrender to lies lit a fire the world could no longer ignore. Have you ever seen one boy's struggle ignite a spark so fierce it forced an entire system to see again? Today, Elijah Ford is an award-winning robotics engineer and a powerful advocate for juvenile justice reform. His journey, born from injustice and transformed through resilience, has become a beacon for countless others who once felt invisible. Each year, Elijah travels across the country, speaking to thousands of students packed into gyms, auditoriums, and libraries. His voice, once silenced by fear, now carries the weight of lived truth. He tells them about the night when everything could have ended differently, when a broken system tried to define him by assumptions instead of possibility. He reminds them that their worth is not defined by the labels others try to paste on them. Their brilliance, their dreams, and their dignity live beyond the biases of society. He looks into the faces of young people and tells them, "You are not who they fear. You are who they need." The very courthouse that once treated him as a criminal now hosts his annual Innovation for Justice conference. In that once sterile building, rows of young engineers, advocates, and dreamers gather to showcase their inventions aimed at solving real-world social problems. The walls that once echoed with accusations now vibrate with hope and ideas. In one hallway, a plaque was installed where Elijah once stood in shackles. It reads, "The place of chains became a place of change." Elijah never forgets where he came from. He funds scholarships for first-generation students. He donates robotics kits to underfunded schools. He mentors kids who, like him, are too often mistaken for trouble when they are really miracles waiting for an open door. Somewhere right now, a boy with worn shoes and brilliant dreams sits in a classroom, wondering if he is seen, wondering if the world will ever believe in his potential. Elijah's story reaches him like a hand stretched across a chasm, pulling him forward. Elijah Ford proved that a whisper of truth can shake the foundations of injustice. He showed that even when the system seems deaf, persistence can make it hear. He turned the courtroom that nearly swallowed him into a launch pad for countless others. And every time he speaks, every time he builds, every time he lifts another young person up, he reminds the world, the truth must always have a chance to speak. If you believe the truth must always have a chance to speak, share this story. Someone's life may depend on it.